One of my most important points with blended learning is this is all about a vocation. I think a lot of companies approach training as like a college experience, and I'm nothing against learning and going to college, but I think a lot of what happens in the improvement world in terms of leadership is more like learning how to weld or learning how to play a musical instrument. There's a certain amount of knowledge you have to have, otherwise you're not going to be able to do anything. But that knowledge is only going to get you so far. And then it kind of comes down to practice, and it comes down to experience. And, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice, practice, practice. So my blended learning is about taking really technical topics and a little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of practice.
Welcome to Narrative's Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome DeRoy and Julianne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome DeRoy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julianne Ryan, and I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, fantastic to see you again. It's great that we get to do this once a week. I love it. Yeah. So here we go. Before we move on to introducing our guest today, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast, Leadership Story Talks, wherever you find your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, and also check out our YouTube channel, because that's when you get to see us, not quite in 3 dimensions, but you also get to see our video and what we look like. You can also check out our website, Narrative, narrativ.com/podcasts. That's where you will find this episode, along with the episode notes, as well as our archive of more than 140 episodes at this point. So without further ado, today our guest is George Posansky. He is a seasoned expert in operational excellence with a career spanning over 3 decades in leadership, executive coaching, and performance optimization. George's commitment to improving outcomes and his strategic, action-oriented mindset have made him a sought-after consultant and thought leader in the field. George is also the founder of Capacity to Care, a nonprofit organization dedicated to encouraging super performers to donate their talent, not just their time, to create better outcomes in their communities by driving deliberate improvement in charities. He's the author of the forthcoming Super Performance, 8 Strategies to Reach Full Potential for Yourself, your team, and your organization, coming out with Greenleaf Book Group on September 23rd, 2025. So we're really excited to get the primer on this new book of yours and also get to meet you. So George, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me today. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this.
Well, great. I hope we can live up to those expectations. So here we go. Well, I'm going to kick this off the way we always kick off our episodes. This is a question we ask of all of our guests, as our listeners know. So what is an experience that has shaped who you are today, George?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, catching up on episodes myself, and I'm going to go back to being a very young man in high school. I was not a talented athlete, but I joined the sports teams. I ran cross country, did swimming and track, and I was terrible. I was the definition of terrible. I could distinctly remember on a beautiful fall day in central New York, running up this steep hill, nearly in last place, and my father waiting for me as all the other parents had already left, as I'm kind of trying to make my way to the top of that hill. And, those moments of where you could just give up and decide, this might not be for me, this is not what I'm good at. It would have been something that I could have done. And my dad encouraged me not to continue to try. And by the time I was a senior, I became the captain of those teams, but I was still terrible. And this is what I think really shaped me. And it really is kind of the foundation of my upcoming book, because it's really about finding what you're good at. And I wasn't a good athlete, and I was never going to be a good athlete. But what I was good at was trying to be a little bit better next time than I was this time. And continuously improving those times, continuously improving my performance, measuring myself against me was my goal, because I didn't compare necessarily to the top athlete, but I could always feel better if I know I was a little bit better. And that spirit, in my opinion, is contagious. And it's really what I've built my consulting practice around, is helping people find that potential and being able to build on that opportunity to always be a little better tomorrow than you were today.
I love this story for so many reasons, because after being in HR and witnessing a lot of sales and pitches of people who told you they worked on water, everything was perfect, all you had to do was buy the package. And I never really bought into that stuff because I want to see how somebody suffered and
Absolutely.
what informed their experience that they end up being an expert. And that would sell me. I mean, and that you're not doing this as a selling pitch. Well, you are kind of, sort of, but you're informing us in a way that really speaks to us, because I can see that kid running up the hill and dealing, like, getting past humiliation, getting past the fact that you're alone, getting past that you're, I don't know if it was raining or whatever, sunny day, doesn't matter, that you had to fight the internal argument of what was going on and do something with that. So thank you. That's an excellent backstory that really says a little bit about you in 2 minutes or less.
No, well, I genuinely appreciate that. And, having a diversity of experiences, watching, some of those folks that have that sort of level of talent of a top athlete. I've watched it in corporate America, where the level of intelligence, the level of education, the position that people have, and I've watched them give up. When things get difficult, when things are uncomfortable, things are not going their way, they just gave up. And to me, that separation around people who can persist, the ones who are not going to give up, the ones who are going to double down on the things that they know they can succeed on, that's what we have to find in people. And that's what helps you become that super performer.
So I want to build a little bit on what you just said there. This idea that there are people that are kind of separated by the act of, do I keep going or do I give up? And how do you work with people in terms of recognizing that, first of all, because it can't be something easy to acknowledge, right? Nobody likes to say that they gave up, right? They like to give you lots of reasons for not continuing something, and this is why we need to stop something, and I'm sure those reasons sound very, very valid to them, certainly. So I'm curious how you get people to recognize that, and then how do you get them kind of to across that threshold of, oh yeah, no, you're not only am I realizing that I've hit a wall, but now I actually can also see that maybe I can get past this wall.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's pressures in our society, and I think we put pressures on ourselves psychologically to focus on that negative, focus on that moment where I gave up, or that moment that I didn't do as well as I wanted to. And I certainly can think of a million times that I've done that. I'm not somebody who doesn't give up. I've certainly given up plenty of times, but it's not about getting up or giving up. It's about getting up, and what do you do after? So a big part to kind of answer your question, in my opinion, is getting people to focus on their successes and not focus on their failures. So getting up that hill was not about whether I was going to give up or not. I wasn't sure I was going to finish that race. What I wanted to do was just make it to the top of that hill, because the last time I didn't. And the fact that I did, my dad was proud of me, and then that meant the next race I was going to go further. And whether that's an operator in a steel mill or paper mill that I'm working with, or an executive in the C-suite, we don't focus enough on sustaining these successes. And in my book, I talk about this concept called the golden hour, and this idea that there really is no clock on the idea of perfect. So what is perfect? Something that happens in a second, something that happens in an hour, or something that happens in a day? If we can find those moments where things are going well and then try to get to the top of that hill, just try to push yourself a little bit further than what you thought you were capable of doing, then you're a little better tomorrow than you were today. So to answer your question, it's not about what made me give up. It's about what keeps me going and how do I sustain that performance.
Yeah.
If you saw me now looking down my phone, I broke my own rules. This is in podcast you didn't know. So in audio and visual words, you know this. It's because on our fridge in the house, we have a quote from Failing Forward. Not Maxwell. It's an Irish author. And even though I look at it every day when I open it, I blanked on it. So I think it's about fail well and then fail forward and keep going forward and building from the mistakes, which you make a good point. We're not very good about that action learning. This is what happened. This is what I took away. And this is what I need to do to get better as we go forward. So that is such a valuable thing to share with people, saying that's how you improve.
It's interesting. The field I work in is process improvement, and the vast majority, I would say, to my knowledge, every other person who works in the field focuses on the root cause of your problem. What created, what generated the reason for the defect, the failure, the loss. And what I found was we don't spend any time trying to understand the root cause of our success. And what really led to, the podcast that you would be most proud of, the one that you submitted for an award, there were things that went so well. And are we focused on really understanding what made that so good so that we can use it to get to the top of that hill and that we can use it to have a better time our next time? We give way too much energy to those things that trip us and cause those failures. And the amount of energy, the amount of money, the amount of time corporations, companies put into trying to figure out what happened yesterday, and then completely ignoring the value of that 20, 30, 40-year employee that brings such extraordinary experience and benefit. And when they retire, they say, oh, we lost this. You didn't lose it. You gave it up. You never bothered to understand what they were contributing and what they were doing and sharing and replicating that knowledge. And to me, it's such a huge opportunity for us as a society, for companies to start looking at the glass half full and not just focusing on what water spilled out.
Speaking of that glass half full and valuing people's strengths and building from there, I'm curious what kinds of patterns or behaviors you've found in helping people in teams not reaching that, what you call that golden hour moment, and also just repeating those, because you also use the word replicable, right? So I'm curious what those, if you have an example of a pattern or behavior that really shows you, okay, yeah, we're in that golden hour, and now if you replicate this, this won't just be a miraculous thing that happened one time.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the way we tend to measure ourselves, the way we sort of judge what the definition of good is. And it's always extraordinary and certainly just an extraordinarily satisfying experience for me when I ask people to kind of look at it this way, because it typically creates this aha moment where people are like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, that is interesting. Because if I thought about what would allow me to kind of sustain this performance, and if I think about what are the things that then are getting in my way, the things that's preventing me to get to the top of that hill, that's very different than the way I'm measuring myself. I'm measuring how frequently I have this problem. I'm measuring the number of times I've made these mistakes. I'm measuring, the gap in my performance. A concept that I think is really aligned with your question, Jerome, is what I call the prison of expectations. And the prison of expectations is this trap that we often find ourselves in, especially in corporate settings, where last year we had a budget, or we had a number of widgets that we had to make, or a number of listeners that we wanted to have for our podcast. And we look at that and say, well, 3% seems like a pretty good improvement. That if I had, 3% more listeners, if I had a 3% better budget, then those would be good goals for me. But if I set 10%, that may not be realistic. And then therefore I'd have to explain why I didn't meet this very aggressive, very lofty goal. So therefore I'm going to kind of hedge my bet a little bit. I'm going to make sure that I have a stretch, but I don't want to be ridiculous, because being ridiculous means I'm never going to get those, those high lofty results. What this does is it creates this prison of expectations where I'm now trying to optimize what could be a somewhat broken process or system. You hear a lot people talking about first principle thinking. Well, this is kind of what that means, is why are we trying to optimize something that may not be producing a desired result, when we can kind of go back to the beginning and say, well, what should we be getting out of this? What should be the outcome or the result? And let's set a target around whether or not we can perform at that level. Even if we can only do it for one podcast and reach that many listeners, let's then figure out how to do it for two, versus setting ourselves a goal for just having a marginal 3% improvement this year. The goals we set kind of shape what then a lot of employees, a lot of, folks in organizations end up focusing on. And if they're focusing on that 1% goal, then they're recognizing I'm always just trying to be a little better tomorrow than today. And honestly, if I need to do it, I can by putting in a little bit of extra effort. So I'm just going to continue to always accept that status quo. You're never going to get that true transformation that organizations can achieve.
That's interesting. I wonder what I'm going to go back to the story you told at the very beginning of the interview, because I wonder how much relationships and leadership have to do, or the relationship to the leader, whether that's your manager, your operator, et cetera, have to do with these kind of, I'm going to go beyond, performing beyond expectation, right? You just talked about the prison of expectations, but that transformative thing, because you mentioned I went up the hill because I wanted to make my father was proud of me, right? And so I wanted to do better the next time. And if we transfer that to the corporate environment, and where you are, I wonder how much of that you've seen makes a difference, and how important is that in the equation of getting people to be these super performers?
Yeah, I work a lot in manufacturing. I've worked in a lot of industries, but I work a lot in manufacturing. And, to tell a bit of a story, a number of years ago was working in a plant that makes cardboard boxes. In the industry, they call it corrugate. But it is, it's a somewhat dirty, very difficult process. And one of the things I've learned is that if you listen to the people who have to work in those difficult and dirty processes, not supervise them, not teach them, not try to tell them, but really listen to them, it's amazing what they'll teach you. And there was an operator who really wanted nothing to do with process improvement. They just wanted their shift. They just wanted to get their time. They just wanted to meet their expectations. And I kind of listened to what are these things that are getting in your way? What's frustrating you? What makes your day more difficult? And that operator kind of shared with me that the capability of this equipment is far greater than what we run it at. And their ability to be able to achieve much higher levels of performance are not difficult, because when they need to, they can make up, these losses, these problems they have. But the issue was that first line layer of supervision and leadership. And what were they really looking for and asking for? And also, were they listening? And, I know your podcast, you guys talk about this all the time. And it's one of my favorite words, and that's empathy. And that ability to really understand the circumstance somebody else is in, to tender a machine for 12 hours a day in a 90 plus degree environment at 80 plus degree humidity. You got to have a lot of empathy. And to do it for decades, you really have to appreciate their commitment. That leadership has to be able to empower that employee, because if they know they can break free of that prison of expectations, if they can get that higher level of performance, they got to be allowed to do it. Then they got to be seen as something that we'd reward and we'd benefit. Where in reality, what happens is if somebody does really, really well, the supervisor is going to say, whoa, hold on. If you do that today, guess what the manager is going to ask me to do tomorrow? So let's slow down there, Tex. let's back up a little bit. So the supervisor is literally slowing down the employee because they don't want to be held by the manager to do those things. What we find is when we create a culture where we start with empathy and then we literally empower those employees to reach their full potential, they have pride in what they're doing, and they're able to then have those golden hours. They're able to show these levels of performance. They can win the race, not just finish the race. And when those things start to happen, you end up with this autonomy. And it's what everybody talks about. So many books are written about, where somebody who's responsible, whether it's in a factory or a hotel or a restaurant, is really taking ownership for performing and producing a high quality outcome. It's so easy to talk about, but it's so rare to actually see happen.
And what you just said resonated with me. Not only I could think of the guy who said that store innovation, because we've all met one of those individuals when we've worked in supply chain, et cetera. And then also on the back end, like maybe that supervisor, his backstory is that he witnessed changes and then finally you lost a head count or something changed or something closed. So figuring out what your intention is and what's going to happen behind it and what's your plan for success on every level, not just increased revenue. What are you going to do with all that resources and brain power? So I think that's something to ponder, because we see it in very narrow focus a lot of times. I'm really curious about the title of your thing. I've been looking because that has on your shirt, because that has a story too. So my blended learning, how that came about.
Oh wow! Okay, I didn't expect, but it's a great story. It's a great story, and it. So I was working in an organization running kind of a continuous improvement program, basically doing what I do today, but I was working in a company, in all the corporate kind of stuff. I was hiring trainers and consultants to provide these services for these highly specialized skills and this experience. And all of them kind of did the same thing. They all had a book, which is now, I have a book, which is its own story, but they all have a book. They all have a recipe. They all have preset PowerPoints, and none of them wanted to provide the service I wanted. They all wanted to provide the service they wanted. And when I, through kind of a couple of circumstances, ended up being able to start my own company, I said, I'm never going to do that. The only thing I'm ever going to do is focus on the value that the client is looking for. And what immediately happened, and this is 20 years ago, is the client did not want to sit in a hotel for 4 weeks and listen to me talk. So I came up with this strategy of using blended learning, which today we take for granted, but I was, one of the original users of the web talking technology where we had to dial it on our phones. And, so I'm explaining to companies that I'm going to do these short 30-minute classes on their computer live. And people are looking at me like, well, how are you going to do that? Like, but it was the birth of what has become a wonderful practice for me, where we do a lot of micro learning. We do a lot of flipped classrooms where we're trying to take the boring part and make that the excess, make that the easy thing. And then we focus on experience. One of my most important points with blended learning is this is all about a vocation. I think a lot of companies approach training as like a college experience, and I'm nothing against, learning and going to college. But I think a lot of what happens in the improvement world in terms of leadership is more like learning how to weld or learning how to play a musical instrument. There's a certain amount of knowledge you have to have. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do anything. But that knowledge is only going to get you so far. And then it kind of comes down to practice, and it comes down to experience. And, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice, practice, practice. So my blended learning is about taking really technical topics and a little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of practice.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for letting me ask this question and satisfy my curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing, and I'm looking at the time as well, but there is a question I really wanted to ask, which was around this idea of unusual signals that you point to in the book as well, and such as parking lots or cultural references, in order to illustrate some of the key performance lessons.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what's one surprising or overlooked signal, perhaps, that leaders should start paying attention to right now?
Yeah, break rooms. In the book, I talk about finding earplugs in the parking lot. Kind of tells you people don't care. They're on their way to the car and they're just going to, throw them away versus find a trash can. I don't think leaders spend enough time in break rooms. Whether it's the back of a restaurant. The cooks are always sitting on a bucket having a cigarette, right? That's the place you'll find the best information. Or in a factory, there's always a break room that they're kind of getting some air conditioning until they got to go back out on the floor. Leaders don't spend enough time in the break room because they want to supervise the work, and they feel like they have to be in this sort of relationship where getting to know people on a personal level, getting to know their kids' names, and being able to listen to the things they perceive as problems. Don't fix or correct, listen. And the reality is what they're sharing is their reality. And whether it's true or not doesn't matter. Now asking the question, how did somebody come to that reality? And how do I now fix whatever perceptions created those realities? I think too many leaders want to go out and sort of fix the problem, and they don't realize that the problem is the perceptions that they've created, not the facts that they want to go out, argue over.
Were you about to say something, Julian?
Just singing my song, because I used to say, go find that cranky person that tells you like it is, and there's data there. So, go high, go work the staircase. And, before when people were smoking more, like go visit them upstairs because they have a lot of data and a lot of information.
Yeah. The 3 minutes before you can clock in or clock out, there's a lot of people standing in line, right? You learn a lot right there.
Yeah. I mean, I had one of the certainly at the beginning of my career, one of the big breakthroughs for sure, or big opportunities that came my way, thanks to a conversation in the break room, with someone that I never spoke to because she wasn't in my department. And, this was Paris in 1999, or maybe it was 2000. No, it was 1998 in Paris. And people were still smoking in offices at that time. And so she actually did have a cigarette. She actually did have a cigarette at the water cooler, and told me about this opportunity. She'd been in the company for 30 years. She'd been a secretary, a receptionist, an executive assistant, all the things. And she knew everyone. And so she told me about this opportunity in Asia. And 6 months later, I was landing in Hong Kong in Asia, and something I had never imagined for myself. And that was purely because of a conversation in a break room. And one of the things that I've even written about this, and our listeners can go and check that out on our website. But one of the things that I remember very clearly at that time is that none of the leaders this was a bank that I was working in. You'd never see the leaders in these break rooms. It was always the assistants. It was always people like, I was an intern at the time. People, and so they never got to hear these kinds of stories or these kinds of experiences that people were talking about, which were the successes, the failures, the family things, whatever it was. And I always thought that was such a missed opportunity. So thank you for bringing that up and reinforcing that point, because that's become something that we've focused a lot on at Narrative, is how do you capture these kinds of stories that really truly reflect the culture of your organization. And because those are the stories you need to share. Those are the ones that really transfer knowledge, to your point earlier, when somebody leaves after 40 years, we lost that person. Well, no, there was a way to get that knowledge and keep sharing it. So thanks for reinforcing all these points.
Yeah, one point on that I'd like to maybe emphasize, Jerome, is the idea that listeners may think, oh, you know what, I've not been to the break room, or I've not pulled up a bucket at the back of the hotel or back of the restaurant. Maybe I should go do that. Don't expect that that's going to work. You need to show up at that break room every day for a week, maybe a month. And then when you become a fixture, when you become part of the gang, when you become somebody who has also shared, you now will blend in to the conversation. And that's where you're going to learn something. I think we talk about something called a Gembo walk, this sort of very technical term, this lean term from Toyota. And people go out and do it once and expect to learn something. Well, no, everyone's changing their behavior when they're seeing you coming. But when you do it every day, when you do it multiple times a day, well, this is just how things are. And now we drop our guard and we start to talk.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's a great, practical thing that our listeners can actually put in place, right? It's Absolutely. Not... None of this is difficult to do. It's a question of discipline and consistency, is what I'm hearing.
It is, and it really is the theme of the book, coming out in September. There's nothing that anybody would look at, I think, and say, well, wow, that is, an entirely nuanced argument, the heavily researched. It's a lot of the practical things we talked about today. How often are we looking at the glass half full? How often are we sort of going out and kind of really understanding what people are thinking? And I organize it as kind of these 8 strategies to really try to give people these actionable processes that they can follow, these recipes they could use, and even kind of give them a checklist of things that they can go do.
I want to remind at this point our listeners that the book is called Super Performance, 8 Strategies to Reach Full Potential for Yourself, Your Team, and Your Organization. And I'd love to give you the floor for a minute or two. Just what would you like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me on. I think the last point I'd like to make is the things that you do for your company are great. And obviously it helps support your family. It helps support, your organization. But I'm very passionate about the idea that professionals have talent. And whether that's the talent you have in accounting or HR or finance, or in my case, in improvement, organizations, charitable organizations, they also need this talent. And it's easy to give our money. It's easy to give our time of going down and just participating. But I'd encourage people to really think about how can they donate their talent and how can they help these organizations be able to remove those roadblocks. If you think about all the good work that nonprofit organizations try to do, if you're able to help them extend their golden hour, it may be worth much more than you'd ever be able to donate because of your skill, because of your knowledge, because of your experience. So I think that would be one of my final thoughts. The thing about Super Performance is kind of my journey of figuring out that, to really be happy, it's not about making money. It's not about, just, doing well in your job. It's about also being a part of your community and really contributing. And I think, the story of your organization is just inspiring to me, because it's exactly the kind of mission I think we should all be on.
Mm. Oh, well, thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And what a worthy cause to use your talents to repurpose it for others to
Absolutely.
play their organizations forward and their causes forward. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to give you a platform and to communicate these ideas and insights and this mission that you have, which is really wonderful. And we absolutely closely align with. I agree with that. Unfortunately, this is all the time we've got. I know we could go on for a while, but I just want to thank you, George, again for being here, being with us, and sharing these insights with our listeners. Listeners, you will find all the information about George and his consultancy, as well as his forthcoming book, in the episode notes. So make sure to look at that. Of course, Julienne, I want to thank you for being my co-host once again.
Thank you. Always happy here.
Always a pleasure. And if you listeners have been inspired by this session and the stories we told today, please consider enrolling yourself and or your team in our group and one-on-one training programs, so that you can learn how to tell your own story and really communicate what matters to you and why it matters, so that you build your own following and give your ideas some traction. Right now, we actually have a special gift in the episode notes, because we've partnered with the New Mexico State University's Global Campus to create an on-demand, self-paced storytelling training where you'll learn to find, craft, and tell stories for interviews, leadership presence, and pitches. All you have to do is use code NARRATIVE, NARATIV, for a special 25% discount just for you, our beloved listeners. So that's a little gift for you. Make sure to go and find it. We're always ready to listen to you. If you have any challenges or anything you want to bring to us, please do so. Go to our website, narrative.com, NARATIV.com. And as always, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review, and go to our YouTube channel as well. All of this drives word of mouth so that more people can hear the insights from George Pazanski and many others that we've had on this podcast. So until next time, thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.